thank you everybody for being here. I see some repeat visitors from last week, which is great. So the fans are growing though. Today, I'm Mary Manley from the Henry Sheldon Museum, and today is part 2 of our Meet the Collectors series of talks. So before I forget, next week at noon, we'll have the 3rd and last in the series. This is in conjunction with our current exhibit, which is up until January 7th. If you haven't seen the show yet, we have, if you're not a member of the museum, which gets you in free anyway, we do have passes for you. Stephanie over here, our executive director, has some passes. So you're welcome to go in the museum afterward to see the whole exhibit, which I encourage you to do. So today we have 5 of our collectors speaking, and I've told them they have to stick to 10 minutes, so I'm going really fast, so they have their full 10. I've got my watch telling them when 10 minutes are up. We're going to hold questions to the very end, and then again, you'll be able to mingle with them afterward as well. So in no particular order, I'll tell you who's here, and then we're going to start with Rick Ceballos, who is here. So we have Rick Ceballos, who has his collection of banjos, one of which is in the exhibit upstairs right now. Rod Michaud has mechanical banks. Pam Pezzulo has children's sewing machines, has collected those for a long time. And Lucinda Cockrell has Lady Head Vases. So I know you're going to be curious about that. And then we have Bob Hooker, who has an amazing collection of metal trash. They're treasures to you, I'm sure. And they have a family history to them. So I'm going to, without further ado, turn the program over to Rick, who will tell you about his banjo collection. Thank you all for being here.
Well, first, I think I'd take my shirt off because it's a little warm right now. And let's see. Hopefully have something appropriate underneath.
Oh, let's hope. That's cute.
Okay, so in the 70s, I was part of a bluegrass band, and there was no banjo player.
What?
So, yeah, what? That's what everybody said. So I was elected to become the banjo player, even though I didn't play the banjo. So I went out and bought a cheap Japanese banjo, and well, it's been downhill ever since. And you know, when I first started, I had no clue of the provenance of the banjo. I figured it was a Southern Appalachian instrument, just like most everybody does. But then, as time went on, and more banjo historians started to show up, it became obvious that the banjo's origins were in West Africa, and they came over in the slave trade with the West Africans. And so I started studying African instruments, and the first one that really stuck out to me that was prominent among the African, the banjo historians was this, that's called an Ngoni, which comes from Mali. There's one in the exhibit right now that's much older than this, but these were played by the griots, G-R-I-O-T, which were the musician class in Mali, and they not only were musicians, but they were keepers of the history, and they worked in conjunction with the ruling classes of the time, and it was passed down from generation to generation. So in a way, even though it looks pretty funky, it wasn't a folk instrument because it wasn't played by people other than the griot masters, and which are still around today. For the most part, those were men through history. Recently, there have become a few women who have taken up the instrument and had success with it. So these are called spiked lutes because they have basically a spike head. And the way they're tuned is there's no tuners here. The strings are attached to these things on the neck, and you slide them up and down, and that's how you tune it. Now I was hoping to play it with you, but this one has basically become almost impossible to tune. So and the interesting thing about this is the way it was played. It was both a down and an up stroke. They both finger picked it and frailed it kind of. And when you listen to some of the masters of the Ngoni, it's just phenomenal, the intricate music that they can play on such a simple instrument. So I encourage, if anybody's interested, to just Google it and especially on YouTube, there's a lot of videos of Ngoni masters. So that's the Ngoni right there.
You might want to tell them how to spell Ngoni so they know.
Ngoni. There you go. Thank you. So then as time went on, it became, this instrument kind of came to the fore, especially among the banjo historians, because for one thing, it looks a lot more like a banjo. And it has a short thumb string, which modern banjos have. You know, for the longest time they thought that that was added in America, but it wasn't. They found that there were many of these. And these spike lutes that look very similar to this, in West Africa there's over 80 spike lutes that have been discovered. But the interesting thing about this one, this is played by the Hola people of the Senegambian region. And what's interesting about this is that it has the short string, and they play in a down picking manner, not any kind of finger picking. And all the other, at least to people's knowledge, are played with, you know, kind of a hybrid up picking, down picking kind of motion. And I don't know, this one may be close enough to tune that I can give you an idea of what it says. So that's become very popular. And the other interesting thing about this is that the Hola people in Senegambia were rice farmers. So they were very desirable to capture and bring over as slaves and to work in a lot of the big rice fields, because a lot of the farms in the South were rice farms. And so there were an extraordinary number of Hola people that were found in the South during the times of the slave trade. There's no way of knowing that there's one instrument that came from Africa that is a direct descendant of the banjo, but a lot of people feel that this one is about as close as it comes. So this is the e-counting is what it's called. And you know, the thing about banjo, there's all this thing about, well, where did the name banjo come from? And I've read and read and read, and I've never got a good answer. The closest answer that I came to was that this kind of reed that was used for the neck was called a bania in the South. So, you know, I'll go with that. So probably the Africans, when they came over here and they were put on these slave ships, they probably weren't allowed to bring instruments with them, but they had the idea of the instrument with them. And when it first came over here, the first recorded incidents of the banjo were really in Jamaica. Sir Hans Sloane, who was an Englishman, came over and saw that the slaves were playing this kind of an instrument. And what happened right off the bat is that, and this shows that the melding of the European and the African, because now you have a neck with a fretboard rather than a stick. You have tuners rather than sliding it up and down the neck. You still have the gourd and the goat skin head. But it was, and the original banjos were mostly 4 strings, and probably this top lowest string was added many years later. But they were mostly 4-string instruments, and the pictures that I've seen of those original instruments that they called them bonzas back in Jamaica, and so yeah, trying to think what I'm missing here. So anyway, okay, so how are we doing for time today?
Yeah, a minute and a half.
Okay, it's good, perfect. So I'll just play you a little African rhythm on this, if I'm still in tune.
Okay, so I have many collections, and it was very hard to figure out which one to bring. And so I thought about it, and I decided on these antique children's sewing machines just because of their charm. I do not claim to be anything close to an expert, but all I know is I just love them. So let me tell you how I started collecting these. And my father-in-law, he was an automobile upholsterer, so he was interested in sewing. And he and my mother-in-law, Lucille, would go around to tag sales and yard sales, garage sales in the 1960s and 1970s. And they would find some of these wonderful machines. And so he just started collecting them. And he had a pretty extensive collection. Some of them kind of rotted away in the basement, and my brother-in-law got quite a few of them, my youngest brother-in-law. But anyway, he knew about my interest in sewing, and so he presented me with this little Red Riding Hood one, which I absolutely treasure to this day. It is just, it's very difficult to see the decal, but it's Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf on there. And, you know, I don't have any issues with passing them around, but I think it would be better if people saw them afterwards, okay? But anyway, I just fell in love with them at that point. And then I found out a few years later that they had more. And so I started seeking out some of these nursery rhyme and kind of little, you know, just little stories and things like that. And they had a bunch of them. And so I have 2 here. One's in the exhibit, and I have a couple more at home. I have about 18, I think, altogether. And so anyway, but after his death, many more of these machines came to me, and either, you know, from the house, or I started collecting a few more. And my husband, Andrew, I usually get him involved in my hobbies, but he usually says, it's your hobby, you know. But anyway, he's been pretty good about, you know, trying to make some of them work, and I had him going on this one last night. But anyway, It is really impossible to replace some of the needles. I've tried very hard, and some of them are just too long and they just won't work. We did have boxes for some of these, but they absolutely disintegrated. They had been stored in a basement at one point and they just disintegrated. But I just want to talk a little bit about the history of the antique miniature and toy sewing machines. They're both beautiful and practical. Some models were designed just for children to use, while others were made for people who didn't want to have a lot of space taken up in their house. And houses were smaller back then, so some of it was really practicality. The miniature machines actually sew. Some of them do like a chain stitch. I'm going to demonstrate on one of these just to let you see it. But some of these miniature machines were invented because materials were very scarce during the World Wars. So therefore, they couldn't get some of the iron or whatever. So they made smaller versions of them that would work the same. They were heavy duty and they were really good workhorses. Many of them have hand cranks, and these kinds of things are great for travel if you don't have electricity, so it worked out pretty well. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the more well-known of the antique miniature sewing machine manufacturers. So this one right here is an antique Singer, and I think most of you can probably see the Singer logo on that. Yes or no? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
How about right there? Yep, Singer and Singer. And these are heavy, very, very heavy, but they're very well made, and if they're in great condition, they are one of the machines that really commands a pretty high price on the markets. And a lot of them had like a C-clamp to hold to the table. This one does not. Actually, I think the clamp would go over there, and then the child would sit here. There's a little indentation, if you see.
Yeah.
So, and it would clamp to the table, and it was designed for children to use. And, so a lot of these toys were designed to spark the creativity in the children. So once they could do their own sewing, they could make all sorts of creations. So let's see, the next one, which is not here, I wanted to bring it. I have an antique treadle sewing machine for children, and I'm going to pass it around, but I would say, and my friend Suzanne will probably verify this, I think it comes up to maybe here with the machine, and it is small, but I'm going to pass that around if people would like to look at it on the front and the back, and you can see a little bit more of the close-up. And that is from the National Sewing Machine Company, and I believe they're located in Illinois, and Stitchwell was the name on that particular machine, and I really like it a lot. KNE, and there's others, are colorful machines, and I'll pass this around as well. You'll see a colorful machine all the way over on the right. It's sort of pink and white, but there are a lot of that kind. This is one of the shelves in my house that has some of the sewing machines that I own. There's another one called Little Miss, and it's from the Lindstrom Company, and it's from Bridgeport, Connecticut, in New England. Now, the next thing is the German toy sewing machines, and they are probably the Germans made a lot of toys, and we all know that. A lot of them were exported to this country. And a lot of them are very high quality. They vary in height, design, color. Some of them are standard black metal, and others have the most incredibly beautiful decals. I have several Art Deco ones at home, which are kind of neat. So and then Muller was a very large toy company, and the Mullers looked a lot like the Singers, but they had a slightly plainer design. Now, Cassige, which is the one I have the most of. So Cassige was one of the great German toy makers and toy sewing machine makers in the 20th century. But 50 years prior to the 20th century, I don't remember that, but they actually had locks and that they were making. And it was produced locks. I'm going to find the little logo here, right on this one right here. And it has a logo of a big eagle. It says made in Germany, and there's a little key on it. And so come up and look at that later. And the reason why it had that for a logo is the eagle's grasping the key. And it's supposed to say that it was the key to their success. That's what the trademark meant. Let's see here. I'm going to actually demonstrate one of these sewing machines, and this is a Cassige, and it's a very little one, and it is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which I love. And I'm going to see if I can actually sew on this. I did last night, but we'll see. Okay, that's enough. And as you can see, it has, well, it did sew, but it just pulled out, but it does sew and it does lock, and it's a cute little thing. Let me see if I can do it again, because I think maybe I did something wrong. These are a little trickier than my regular sewing machines, but you could do a 1/4-inch seam, which I love, and
So all you do is just turn the
yeah,
wheel, the
yeah, and
handle.
Are they all designed as a right-hand orientation?
you know, that's interesting, because I think they are, and there you go. There's the seam. Okay.
Nice.
A lot of them have like a chain stitch for some of these older ones. Okay, so what happened was the company's name, Cassige, I thought this was interesting. The heir to the company was Carl Sieper II. And in 1901, he was the grandson of the company founder. And the company founder, CA came from Carl, SI came from Sieper, and GE, you would think it might be Germany, but it is Gevelsberg in Westfalen in Germany. So that's the Cassige, that's how that came about. And the grandson, was asked if he could supply cheap sewing machines to schools. So he thought, well, you know, this is really good. I'd like to compete with Muller. He'd been through the Muller factory. And he said, yep, I think I will try to do that. So that's what he did. And he had all those contracts, and he expanded the sewing business. And to this day, Cassige is much more well known than the Muller. And they went from 1902, he started the machines, to 1975. And I do remember 1975. But some were actually engraved British zone because of the occupation from 1945 to 1949. So some of them will actually say on that British zone. So the other thing I wanted to just...
You're almost done, Pam.
I'm sorry?
Almost done.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I know. I have a gift of gab, sorry. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the value of the machines. It varies greatly, just like the regular machines. And they have some that, well, for instance, the treadle machines are sold in the $1,000 range, but there are some that can be acquired from $50 to $200. And the International Sewing Machine Collectors Society said there was a clown sewing machine that sold at auction for $13,600. And 2 seconds. This is where a lot of my sewing machines live. My husband and I have built boxes, and I have antique sewing things. I had to show you this.
Yes,
Sorry.
you did. That's okay.
Anyway, it's got a lot of antique things that I've collected from grandparents, and this is an antique German half doll that's a pincushion, and so basically that's it. So,
Wow.
and I'll leave this open so you can see some of those later. Okay? Can I take a look?
Rod? Where's Rod?
Rod, would you like to come?
Can't remember what's your name.
I'm Jim.
Sorry,
Jim.
Jim. I'm Rod, everybody. Just before, I might forget this. I have these books all about mechanical banks and toys. They're for free. They're great books if you want them. Just contact the museum, and my friend in Florida wrote these, and they're just wonderful books if you like antique toys or banks. And contact the museum, they'll contact me, and I'll get you one.
Wow.
So there's 2 of them here for free. They're beautiful bank books and about toys and stuff. People ask me, how do you get banks and toys and things that I have? Let me tell you some quick stories, okay? I sold some baseball cards once to get these. The baseball cards I sold were to a guy by the name of Mr. Mint, Alan Rosen, who was the one, you heard about this baseball card that sold for $12.5 million? He was the one who bought it originally.
Wow.
And so much of this is luck. Let me tell you about this story, and then I'll get into toys and banks. He's sitting in his office one day, and a kid calls him up and says, my father drove the car or the truck that Topps had to sell baseball cards to all the different dealers. And at the end of the season, my father would take what was ever left over and put them up in the attic, all the baseball cards. This was in the 50s. He had the 50s, he had Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, all the great cards, all in mint condition. So the guy calls him up. He doesn't know whether the guy's fooling him or not, but he says, I'll take the trip to Massachusetts. He hires an armed guard to come with him because he has $250,000 in cash in the suitcase. If these cards are real, this is in like 85 or 86. And the cards are real. He gets the deal for $131,000. Now I may be off by a few thousand, but that's what he gets all these cards for. Today these cards would be worth 30 to 40 million conservatively. And so it was just luck. He just happened to be, by the phone. The kid called him up, and it worked out. Going a little further, in Great Barrington there was a couple named Aaron and Abby. Thank you. Was it Schroeder? Schroeder. They had the best toy collection I've ever seen. They had banks, they had clockwork toys, they had everything. He started in 1960 collecting, and I guess he died in about 2015, but his wife was still around. So what she did was she took all his toys and built twice the size of this museum, 3 floors to fill up the whole barn. All his toys that he had from the 19th century, early 20th century. They just sold that, and I was lucky enough to go see that barn that she built, and I went in there, and I didn't even know what they did at the time, and I said, to have this kind of money to build this and buy all these toys through all these years, what did the guy do? And he wrote songs for Elvis Presley and Jimi Hendrix, and even sold one of his songs to the Beatles. So all he had to do to get money was go down to the mailbox, and open the mailbox, and there were the residual checks. And so his collection came up last year for sale, and it only sold for $5 million. So you think about it, one baseball card that guy Alan Rosen had in Montvale, New Jersey, sold for $12.5 million, and the whole collection is probably worth 30 or 40 million. And this guy collected toys and banks and all kinds of stuff from 1960 to 2000, and his collection only sold for $5 million. So it's better to invest in baseball cards than toys and banks. So about this, this sold for about $1 in 1895. Women who painted this were given 2 cents for every bank they could paint. And if they made a mistake, they were docked a dime. Wow. So what the women did, they all got smart. This bank particularly is from Buffalo, New York, Shepherd Hardware. But I'm from Connecticut, and they made banks and toys at Ives and at J&E Stevens Company in Cromwell, Connecticut. This is where this story comes from. So the women got together. They didn't want to be docked a dime. They're only getting 2 or 3 cents to paint one of these banks, and if they made a mistake, or I don't know, they messed up on the hat, or the guy came around, they lost a dime in 1890. So what they did is, the J&E Stevens Company was a huge place, kind of like this, but they had places in the rafters where you can hide your mistakes. So the women got together, and they figured out where to hide the banks when they made mistakes so they wouldn't get docked a dime. So about 40 or 50 years later, somebody figured this out, that there are hundreds of banks in the rafters worth thousands of dollars. And I don't know how they figured it out, but they did, and they ended up, buying beautiful houses in Nantucket with what they found in the and what they found in the rafters. I've always loved that story. This bank in particular, the Shepherd Company did not prime their banks. As you can see, the base of this bank is mint condition, but the rest of it, since they didn't prime it, is kind of losing paint.
Rob, could you pick it up to
sure.
everybody in the back?
And these children's toys, they sold for about $1. If this bank was in mint condition, it would sell for about $25,000. Just so you know. And there are a few of them like that. The Schroeders had one, and I have a friend in Long Island who has one in mint condition. In fact, all his banks are in mint condition. It's ridiculous. I'll show you how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, we were wondering how it worked.
Yeah, okay. Here, you put the penny. Now, imagine this. Even in 1895, or when they were selling these, they sold them for, I think, about $8.50 a dozen. And they sold them, the company did, the Shepherd Company, and then they sold them for $1. Who had $1 to buy these? I don't know. Some of the banks, if you look in here, sold for as much as $4.95 a bank in 1895, 1899, 1900. So there's a dial in the back, a little button you push, and the penny goes, the satchel opens up, the penny goes in there, and its beard shakes. And that's what mechanical banks are, and kids had a lot of fun with them. And the boxes that these came in are even more, sometimes more expensive than the bank itself. And because it's like getting a Christmas present, you just throw the wrapper around and throw it in the. Well, the bank boxes that these came in, some of them sell for $5,000 to $10,000 because they're so rare. Wow. They're like that. That's what a bank box looks like, just like that, where it says horse and cattle. It would say Uncle Sam Bank, and they're so rare because, like I said, they're like wrapping paper. They just throw them out. So again, that's what banks are. They're fun little things. And
How many do you have?
how many do I have? More than one. I wish I didn't sell my baseball cards to buy banks. Baseball cards. Everyone likes baseball cards and basketball cards. Banks. They're fun to have. Anyway, I think the people I mentioned, the Schroeders, they had a 2-part collection. They sold all their stuff last year, but they found more stuff in the attic or something. So they're having another auction at Batoya, I think Batoya, New Jersey, and so they're going to sell more stuff. But that's what happens when you write songs for Elvis Presley. You have a lot of spare cash to go around to all the antique shows and find stuff.
Thank you.
Okay.
There are 4 more chairs inside, 4 or 5 chairs. You want to come sit? Got 2 more people. Come sit. Okay. Lucinda is up next. Lady Head.
Lady Heads. All right, from banks to ladies. How many of you have ever seen these? Yes. I heard somebody said I used to have one of those. Somebody came up.
I think I have had one, yeah.
Yeah. All right, great. Okay. All right. Well, one of them is up. The one that what got me started on this was my grandmother, and I called her Nana. And do you see a resemblance here? This is Nana and my mama. Can you tell I'm from the South? Do you see a hat? And do you see gloves? And do you see high heels? Mm-hmm. And do you see pearls? I got my pearls. I got my mother's pearls on just for y'all today, so that I could be in style with my ladies and Nana and Mama. So here's Mother's Day, 1967, and they're styling here, aren't they? Yeah. So this is what I grew up with, and this here, I don't know that you want to pass around Nana and Mama in 1967. But she was from Alabama, up, and she had the lady's head that's up in the exhibit. And I just remember it being up on the dresser, and just always loved that thing. And she would change she would change the flowers in it, and she would spray paint the flower. You know, they were plastic, and she would she would spray them to different colors and change the flowers in them. And then so so I became a head hunter later on, and started collecting them. And so I learned. I'm sort of like you. I have many collections. I think if you're a collector, my husband calls it a disease. And so we all like, it's lovely to be here with all these fellow collectors, because we do understand one another. But obviously, these ladies exude glamour, and they were made by for florists to put little arrangements in originally, and it cut down on the number of flowers you had to do, and they also were nice and collectible, so the florists saw that they could make money out of this. Now, early on, they're called head planters, Lady Head Vases, head vases, universally. And so it maximized sales for them, pretty much. And they found out they could make a lot of money. Now, they started being made in the 1930s, but the people that were making them were mostly women ceramic makers. And people's names, the most famous one was Betty Lou Nichols. But there was others, the Florence Ceramics, Royal Copley, who was Dorothy Copley, but this is the 1930s, and Betty Lou started with a rolling pin and a bunch of clay on her parents' kitchen table in La Habra, California in 1935. And by 1945, she'd opened up a factory. And so here, Mary can pass, here's Betty Lou's right here. So you can see, she started this whole thing. So you can see the hat, the ruffled lady, and the pouting lipstick, and the big, thick, black eyelashes. No, here, you can pass that around. So she's kind of started the standard, and then it caught on. And then after World War II, the Asian market kind of started undercutting the American market, and then the American manufacturers started bringing them in and selling them. The Chinese and Japanese manufacturers would sell them, and then the Americans would take them and market them here. So then you have the basic popular ones that you see here, which are the names of NAPCO, which stands for National Potteries Company, and that's my lady that's up there in the exhibit. And then UNESCO, Lefton, China, Inarco is one of them, Relpo, and Rubens are the best known. They all pretty much, they came with a paper label. If you can see, they usually have a paper label and then a back stamp, or a stamp on there with a number and the date. This lady is 1956. I have 56 and 58 and 57, and then you can see these are 50s ladies, and they usually all the 50s ladies usually all have hats and these beautiful coiffures. Sometimes they have the hands that are doing things around their faces, and the pearls. she lost a pearl. A lot of times they lose their earrings. I think some of mine up here, she's lost her earrings too. But this is, can you tell this is 60s hairdo right here? So we get the 60s coming in, but you can tell the 50s ladies, and then you get holiday things happening. This is the 1950s, obviously. So it's been estimated that there were over 10,000 different varieties of these things. So they're out there. They're usually, anywhere from 5 to 8 inches. But there's also miniatures that are 2 inches, and they go up to 14 inches high. And then this is a modern one, so they're still kind of getting made. You can get the same effect, but they're still getting made, but a little more popular pop going on. And then the ones that have the most expensive are the ones that are celebrities, like Lucille Ball, Carmen Miranda, and you can see some of those that I'm passing around, Marilyn Monroe, and that kind of thing. Yeah, Jackie Kennedy. So you can buy them for anywhere from $30 to $200, except like Jackie Kennedy, and some of them they go up into the thousands sometimes. Most of them are white ladies like this that are with these hairdos, bobs and curls and so forth. There's some, I know one gentleman that only collects brunettes. So, we're all, to each his own. So there are brunettes, blondes, redheads, the whole bit. As you can see, all different kinds. And then there's some rare ones that collectors go after, like the I Dream of Jeannie one there. But for the most part, you can buy them anywhere from $30 to $200, but they do get a little, and you can get them on eBay or auctions, places like that. But I usually, when I was collecting them, it was more going to antique shows with my mother. She's both Nana and Mama are gone now, but I still have the ladies' heads to remember them. So thank you very much for letting me talk about the ladies and my fetish. So thank you all.
Now our last speaker is Bob, who has his trash over there.
Well, you have to do something with your trash. So, my name is Bob Hooker, and as you can see, most of my collection is also in mint condition. That's why I wear the gloves. And I had an uncle once who collected brunettes, but it didn't have the same effect as your friend. So, this isn't just ordinary junk. My piece in the exhibit is a horseshoe. I live in a building that was my grandparents' house, and but it was not built as a house. It was built as 2 businesses. The first floor was a wheelwright shop, and they made the metal rims and parts for wheels and the wooden parts for wheels for wagons. So they had a forge, and I'm sure they also shod some horses now and again as well. And the second floor was a wagon shop to repair and paint wooden parts. And when my grandfather and his dad were blacksmiths, they noticed this building had been empty for years, and they also knew that there was a forge in there, and it was probably 10 times as big as their little blacksmith shop. And it had power equipment in it. Everything on Mechanic Street in Pittsford, all of the businesses were water powered, and there was a sluiceway that went behind all the buildings from the dam, and every business would take water power from the sluiceway. But the sluiceway is long since gone. The dam has been mostly deconstructed. But my grandfather and great-grandfather were just like drooling over all this equipment in there that could be used. And so they bought an enormous electric motor and parked it in the corner and hooked it up to all the belt systems overhead. And they rented the first floor for a number of years. And they were able to expand their business quite a lot. And eventually, they bought the building. They bought the building 100 years ago this year, 1922. And the upstairs had been vacant as well, and so they turned the upstairs into a home. So well, my dad grew up there, and all of his siblings grew up there. And when I was a child, my grandfather, of course, a lot of blacksmiths either went out of business or adapted to fixing cars. And my grandfather was one that adapted and went to fixing cars. So it wasn't until after my late husband and I bought the building that I knew that it had been a wheelwright shop. I just always knew it as my grandfather's garage. And what is now our living room used to have a car parked in it when I was a kid, an enormous Buick, and all of us little cousins, we'd crawl through it and play in the car and all that sort of stuff. My late husband was a great researcher and genealogist and all that sort of stuff. So he followed the history of all of the buildings on our street, the deeds, and some stories about their origins. So my grandfather, he was fixing cars as far as I knew, and my dad fixed cars. He grew up there at his father's knee, and he told me that when he was 9 years old, one of his chores was to come into the garage and take apart the old batteries that had gone dead, and to take out the metal plates and pour out the acid and put in new metal plates, put in new acid, and screw it back together. And of course, I'm thinking, who in their right mind has a 9-year-old fooling with battery acid? But apparently my grandfather thought it was great because he didn't have to do it. I don't know. Well, anyway, getting somewhat closer back to the collection. When my husband and I bought the building, it had partially collapsed. It had been there'd been water in the basement for many years, and my grandfather died 40 years before my grandmother died, and she was not about to go into the cellar and do anything. And they didn't have any money. It's not like they could call somebody and say, I think something's leaking, or the windows don't work. They just did without. And so there was always, apparently there's like a natural flow of water in one side of the cellar and out the other, but it's a walkout cellar, walkout basement. So it only got to be a foot deep. But it was a foot deep for 48 years. And the beams rotted. And one day, the first floor just collapsed. It broke in half, like opening a book. And a whole bunch of stuff fell into the cellar. The cellar was already full. Anyway, that's the mess that we had to deal with. And so we spent a good deal of time cleaning out, all kinds of stuff out of the cellar. And I'm going to change gloves here. One of the things that we found in the cellar, obviously it's not the same kind of collection. There were interesting things, like we found a pile of dishes on the cement floor of the cellar that were stacked in a very particular way, like they'd been stored in a cardboard box. But the cardboard box had disintegrated, and there was this little stack of dishes that had cups and saucers and everything that had been in a box, with no box. That was pretty cool. But the most cool thing that we found was a stack of old ledger books. And there was, I think there are 5 or 6 of them, and they were in water, and perhaps spiced with a little battery acid too. And when we found them, I said, "Oh God, it's too bad. They're destroyed." And my husband said, "Oh no, they're not. they've been underwater for 40 years, but they're not destroyed. It depends on how we handle them, which I thought was kind of nuts, but okay. So he said, as long as we keep them wet and cold, we can do something with them. Well, I wasn't going to do that, so he did. And so we brought all of them up and put each one in a plastic trash bag and put it in my grandmother's refrigerator. And then every night, he would take out a wet book and put a towel on the kitchen table, and he would very carefully open the book, and he had a scalpel, and he would slice each page very carefully, separating it from the other, and flip it over and put a dry paper towel in there. And he went through all of these ledger books with paper towels. They ended up this big with paper towels in them, and let them dry, and here they are. And this one here, I put a sheet in here, so you know, I was trying to find the one that says that my grandfather changed the lady's oil in exchange for 2 chickens. But I was in a hurry and I didn't have to. So what I've got here is my grandfather's name was George Hooker, and his father's name was Heman Hooker. And this is the oldest book, and it's from the Heman S. Hooker and Son business. And this here is from 1912, and he writes down shoeing a horse, 35 cents, soldering something or other, 45 cents, 10 gallons of kerosene, $1.60, welding chain link, 10 cents, soldering something, he greased something. There's a page in here that shows how he paid people that worked for him. And he says, like, you know, John worked one day, $2. You know, Bill worked a half a day, $1. You know, somebody worked 2 hours, 50 cents. So that's what was happening in 1912 in Pittsburgh. So that's part of the, like, I would say that's the gem of my collection, is this set of ledger books, which I'm going to probably donate to the Pittsburgh Historical Society when I get a little older. My kids are, you know, we have 4 daughters, and I'm sure they're not interested in ledger books. But
This they are.
no, they're not interested in this. I've been trying to give them furniture lately, and they're like, no, we're all set. But every time we dig on our property, we find metal, because if you've just shot a horse, what do you want with the old horseshoe? You throw it out the back window, and since everything was water powered, there was a brook down there, and I actually remember my grandfather saying more than once, well, throw it down back, it'll hold the bank in place. Well, apparently they threw it down back, and they threw it out front too, because there's a lot of horseshoes. This is some sort of spring, either from an old automobile or from a wagon. This is a stove grate. As a matter of fact, when I was a kid, my grandmother's kitchen cook stove, she had it converted from wood to kerosene, because they lived on the 2nd floor, and she was getting to be middle-aged, and she didn't like the idea of hauling wood from the woodshed upstairs all the time. So she had it converted to kerosene, and they had a 55-gallon barrel put on the screened-in porch outside the kitchen. And so when they needed kerosene, the guy would come with his truck, and he would drag his hose up the stairway and fill up this 55-gallon drum. And then when she needed kerosene in the kitchen, she had a 2-gallon container that she would bring out and fill up, and then you just inverted it and put it into the back of the stove. So we were digging down back, trying to plant something down by the brook. And my husband used to say, I know we've got your grandmother's stove, but it's too bad they converted it actually, they went and converted it in the 90s to propane, and they just put a propane fireplace thing in there. So he said, it's too bad we can't get your grandmother's cook stove back to its original thing. We're digging down back, and we start finding stove grates. we found a whole bunch of stove grates, and we put my grandmother's kitchen stove back together as a wood stove. This is a spare. And you can come and look at this stuff, you know, this is obviously part of either an old stove or transmission or something. This is where you would hook your license plate on the back of your car, and there's a place for a light bulb. Literally down back we have a 37 Chevy carcass sticking up out of the bank, and a 24 Ford down there sticking up out of the bank, and there's a transmission sticking up out of the bank, but we're trying to plant stuff around it so you don't notice it.
So
Let's
almost
see.
done, Bob.
Yeah.
You know, grab something you want us to see before I cut you off.
Well, you know, it's just an interesting collection. I have a collection of collections. You know, we collected everything, but you know, this is the stuff that's connected to the house and the history. And about 15 years ago, we bought the building next to our house. It's smaller than the house, but about the same shape. And it was a blacksmith shop that, when blacksmithing went out of fashion, they didn't convert it to fixing cars. Some guy in town decided that the village needed a water system, so he started a company, and a private company installed the water system in Pittsford Village. And he called it the Aqueduct Company, and he bought the old blacksmith shop to keep his pipes in. And then when the village bought the water system, it came with this blacksmith shop, and eventually, 15 years ago, the water people said, could you please build us a sheet metal building that we can get a truck into? This is a blacksmith shop. So they sold us this, and that still has a forge, and there's more horseshoes. So,
Right.
yes, that's
Now, when I asked everybody to speak for 10 minutes, Bob asked if he could have an hour. So that's why he went last. But thank you.
once you wind me up.
So many thanks to the 5 speakers. And now, if anybody has questions, I'd like to turn it over quickly to questions for any of the collectors. Yes, Alice.
This is a particular one. It's for you, actually. I did see in the photograph, I did not see, there were a bunch of sewing machines, and a couple of them I didn't see anything to turn it with. And I wondered if there's another system like that one.
No, this was taken off of another sewing machine, and I think it's just missing parts.
So they're all cranked, all of them are cranked.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah, they are. This one was it's got a turn wheel, so yeah, I mean, they're pretty much all cranked.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions? You also can have an opportunity to just chat individually with the collectors if they're sticking around. And I just want to thank everyone for sharing your passions with us today. It's so much fun to hear why people collect and what they collect. So please see the exhibit next door. And I'll mention that we have another barn talk this week. This Friday at noon, we're going to learn about ticks, changing gears. Ticks. So if anybody would like to join us, a professor from the college is going to be speaking. So it's a free talk here in the barn at noon. All right. So thank you all for coming. And